Hello, welcome to our edition of the Christian Recorder Dialogues. This month, as we celebrate Women's History Month, we are bringing in distinguished women who have given a lot to the AME Church as well as to the world. And we are excited today to bring with us Dr. Camelia Okpodu. Welcome to the Christian Recorder Dialogues, Doc.
Thank you.
And as we always encourage you to share in the chat where your church, where you're from, just so that we know that you're engaged with us. Now, Dr. Okpodu, you're here not only as a distinguished educator in your own right, but to share the unique story of someone very special to the AME Church of Wyoming. So first, before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about you. So could you start off with your faith and relationship to the AME Church?
Well, thank you. And this is an honor to share my faith walk. Even though I'm a plant physiologist and biochemist, I believe it's very foundational for people to know that we serve a mighty big God. I was listening to that this morning. And to give you some background as to who I am, I have a very interesting upbringing. I was raised by my biological mother and my uncle. So I spent part of my time in North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where I attended St. Paul's AME Church. And when I got in teenage years, I moved back with my biological mother, and she attended a missionary Baptist church. So I never forgot my AME roots when I traveled, when I became an adult and I took my first job at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. I joined St. Paul's AME Church there with Reverend Edward Scott was my minister. And that becomes a full circle moment for us because Reverend Dr. Scott baptized all three of my children into the AME faith. And my youngest daughter, Corinne Grace, eventually went to Mary Baldwin College where Dr. Scott, Reverend Scott was on the faculty. And so he and his wife, Reverend Andrea Scott, took care of my youngest child. So when I took my job in Virginia, when I left Virginia Tech and I moved down to the Hampton Roads area, I joined St. John's, a historic St. John's AME Church there in Norfolk, where the girls and I went. And then I got the opportunity to go to New Orleans to be the dean of the College of Arts and Science at Xavier University, which is the nation's only Black and Catholic institution. But I still am AME. And so I Googled when I got down there, is there an AME church that was close to me? I knew there were AME churches in Louisiana, but just didn't know where they were. And I found historic St. James, which I still fellowship with them, even though now I live out here in the West. So I joined historic St. James. The funny story is I came into New Orleans on July 2nd. I think I found the church on July 5th or 6th, and I joined and was in the pulpit, in the choir loft for the next Sunday. So I didn't miss a beat. That's one thing about finding our churches and being a part of our community. They welcome you right away. And then when I came to Wyoming and I took the job as the dean for the College of Arts and Sciences, I did the same thing. I Googled, is there an AME church in Wyoming? And everybody laughed at me and said, child, there's no AME church in Wyoming. But lo and behold, there was. Wow. And so I found Allen in my interview. I rented a car and I drove from Laramie, where the University of Wyoming is, to Cheyenne, which is only about a 45-minute commute one way. And I found the church, and I knew that if I was offered this job, that I would have a community that I can join. Not only did I find the church is still active. And so I was very, very happy. So that's kind of how my relationship is with the AME Church. I have found solace in it and a community that I've continued to foster.
Well, it's interesting. I was reflecting on my academic journey, going to college in Georgia, then grad school in Princeton and Chicago. And I've always been able to find an AME church that has anchored me. And so I can appreciate and resonate with, one of the beauties of the connection is the connection. And we're going to get to how you ended up in Wyoming at this AME Church in a little bit. But, you have in your own right a distinguished career in academia. Tell us about your academic walk and, some of your research and how you got to where you are right now.
So my PhD is in plant physiology and biochemistry. And at the time, I went to North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And at the time that I decided on that PhD, that didn't exist. So I kind of crafted the interdisciplinary relationship. It used to be that you stayed siloed. You stayed in the biochemistry or you stayed in physiology, never between would meet, right? And so I decided that I liked both subjects. And my undergraduate degree is in biochemistry, and then my PhD is in plant physiology and biochemistry. After I've completed my PhD, and if you ever look at my resume, it's kind of weird. I kind of jumped steps. I was all but degree, and I took my first job at Virginia Tech. So that's not a misprint. I took my job in 1992. My ex-husband was recruited there to be the coach for the women's soccer program. He started a soccer program there, and I took a postdoc at Virginia Tech. And then I went back and finished my PhD. I had already finished, but I walked. And so I got my degree conferred in 1994. And my experience at Virginia Tech was very interesting. And we had our last child, that's 30 years ago, in Blacksburg, or what's called Christiansburg. And I realized that even though we had the church community, it was not what I thought my children should be exposed to, and that we needed a different type of experience. And so I have 3 daughters. They're all now grown. So I took the 3 girls and I moved to my first job, my first HBCU, Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. I will always love Hampton. I had never had an experience at an HBCU, and Hampton was my inaugural experience. And so I went there and I was on the faculty until I was recruited to be an endowed professor in the University of North Carolina system at Elizabeth City State. So I was an endowed chair in biology. And as God would have it, my youngest daughter got ill and had to be seen at CHKD Hospital. And I'll always be grateful to Norfolk State. I was recruited to be the chair of biology there, and I came back to Norfolk, was able to definitely have my daughter get what she needed at the Children's Hospital. And from Norfolk State, I stayed there for over 18 years until I decided that I needed to grow in a different way. And I asked God for the opportunity to be a conduit by which others can get to what they need to do. And I got to Xavier, and Xavier was a wonderful experience. I didn't leave Xavier because of philosophical difference. I left because I felt I needed to have more to offer, and I needed a larger place to be in order to get those experiences. So I came to the University of Wyoming as their first African-American dean. But one of the things I decided, and I give this advice to anyone, sometimes people will tell you tenure is not transferable. Well, if I'm not good enough to be tenured, then I'm not good enough to be the dean. And I wasn't going anywhere without my tenure. And I thank God for that revelation, because it was that attitude. They voted on my tenure. So I'm a tenured full professor in the Department of Botany. And I did not know my first day what would happen, but God knows that what was going to be here. And I don't know if you want me to go into this, but I found out on the very first day, July 5th, 2021, that my job would be going away.
Wow. Let's just stop for a second. I want our listeners to take this in. Now, you've already told us about this. There's so many things to unpack here. The fact that you got a job as ABD, all but dissertation, which means you weren't even done yet, and they thought you were good enough to hire. That's the first thing. Then you navigated this transition from, starting at an HBCU to another HBCU, moving up to senior faculty in that HBCU. Then you got hired at the University of Wyoming, which is an R1 flagship state university, and you are a full professor in botany, knowing that Black women are less than, I don't even know the number, but it is a single digit number of persons who are full professors in the natural sciences, which is even smaller number. I just want us to take in and sit with this blessing that we have before us right now. And now you're telling us that in the midst of all these accomplishments, you get to Wyoming, and what happened on the first day of your job?
So July 5th, 2021, I walk in and I tease people and I tell them I was the diversity in the room. So I was the only person of color in that room. And I think it was one other woman in the room. And the provost announced to me that they would be getting rid of my position. They wanted to get rid of the College of Arts and Science in the traditional sense, where we had 19 departments, both natural science and humanities and social sciences, and make a College of Humanities. Okay, so at first I thought, and I've written a play called Faith of Our Mothers to chronicle this experience. And at first I thought that he was joking, because I mean, who recruits someone and brings them way across country and then tells them that? But the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, don't panic. They may have brought you out here for one thing, but I'm going to use you for another. And I told you we serve a mighty big God. I get emotional about it because it's really, you look and see the hand of God. If you just be still, you can see God moving in your life. If you will just be still and acknowledge him. So I had a calm about me, and then people were looking at me, but in my mind, I can tell you, and I wrote this in the play, I wanted to be like Jesus was when he went in the temple and he saw those people collecting taxes and he turned over all the tables. So it did occur to me to tear up the room, but Michelle Obama's little voice came in my head and said, when they go low, you go high. Okay. And the other thing I didn't want to do is I didn't want to act a fool because I knew that every Black person who would come after me will be judged by what I did. So I sat there very calmly and I thought, Lord, I know you wouldn't bring me anywhere that you wouldn't take care of me. And I also knew that I had some solace in the fact that I had in writing in my contract that I would be tenured. So I wasn't going to be out of a job per se. I wouldn't be on the job market looking. And actually, I like Wyoming. So it's not a hard lift to be out here. In fact, Laramie, everybody's like, you're so far away. I call it Laradise. And I have felt more Black. And I know this is that more people are going to realize that here than I have when I was at the private HBCU, is because I found out they have interest in the same things that I grew up doing. So I grew up in a rural community, fishing and hiking and going outside and those kind of things are, if you want to do that, Wyoming is the place to do it. The only thing that's bad is I'm far away from my family. And I'm not doing what I know I have the skill set to do.
Yeah.
Right now I'm a full professor back on faculty. I competed for one of the first data science fellows. So I'm having to reinvent myself research wise. And what God said to me, what the Holy Spirit said, what they may have brought you for one thing, but I'll use you for another. It's really interesting because the state of Wyoming has a problem with a weed called leafy spurge. When I was at Virginia Tech, I did my postdoc in the weed science department. So I started laughing when I realized they had this problem. And so I'm writing grants now to use modern technology like genomics to study this plant, and with climate change and with the change in weather patterns, we have to be mindful of this plant could also switch up and cause additional problems. It's estimated to cause about $40 million in loss of revenue from animals such as horses and cattle. And so it's a big problem here in the West. They control it right now by a flea, a type of insect that will actually eat the plant. But we need to study its genomics, because if the environment changes, then we have to be able to have a different way. And we cannot rely totally on herbicides, because herbicides will poison the groundwater and also has an ill effect towards people potentially. So that's where I am now. I'm kind of in a good place. I am back teaching, and I'm teaching my favorite class, which is plant form and function. Other places they call that botany.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just having fun and just trusting the Lord.
Just hearing your story again as someone in academia, and in academia, I say, not jokingly, doing your PhD and being in academia will either bring you closer to God or away or further from God, depending on where your faith is. And just hearing your story and just the fact that, again, there's a weed that is causing millions of dollars in damage in Wyoming. And this Black lady who they brought to the state, whose job that they were going to give, they mysteriously did away with. All of a sudden, who's the botany specialist? That is an amazing story. But again, I want our listeners to really understand what you've done in your career and just the faith that comes throughout all of what you're doing. This is truly a story that I'm glad and honored to hear. We're going to get to talk a little bit more about your faith and relationship with AME Church, but we're going to go to our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about the AME Church in Wyoming.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Keith Donaldson David Lawrence. I'm the pastor of First AME Church, Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also the director of doctoral studies at Payne Theological Seminary. I was born in the beautiful sunny island of Trinidad where God lives. I am your global candidate. And you ask, what is a global candidate? A global candidate is any candidate born outside the continental United States. And in the history of our church, the 207-year history, 93% of the bishops elected and consecrated were born in the United States. 7% were born outside. And I am saying that it is time for us to elect this global candidate, Keith Lawrence. Why? Because Keith Lawrence will educate, Keith Lawrence will encourage, Keith Lawrence will empower. The last time a bishop was elected from my district, the 16th district, was 1972 in the person of Frederick Hilborn Talbot. So it's time for us to go to the 16th district, elect Keith Donaldson David Lawrence, candidate for Bishop 2024. God bless you, God keep you. Lead with Lawrence.
And we're back. So, Dr. Okpodu, thank you for being with us today. You shared with us your rich faith and the journey that has brought you on. And we're just honored. Again, I'm just honored and humbled just to listen to the story. That this is amazing. So, you in Wyoming, you've done quite a bit of work on looking at the history of the AME Church in Wyoming. So, talk to us a little bit about the history that you found, and how did we get out there, and what's going on, and what did you find?
So the interesting thing, as I said earlier, when I came here for my interview, and before I came out, I Googled to see if there was an AME church here and found out there was one in Cheyenne. But when I got here, coming from Xavier, which is a Catholic institution, I came down Grand Avenue and I realized there's a huge Catholic church here called Old Tools. And so of a church that size, I knew that there must be a faith community out here. So I knew if I couldn't get to the AME church, at least I knew I could go to the Catholic church, which I was familiar with because of Xavier. So when I started trying to figure out now, I understood our church being on the Eastern Seaboard and maybe moving as far down as Texas and being in California and up north. Because when people left the great exodus from the South and moved up to places like Chicago or moved out west to California, they took the church with them. So that wasn't surprising. But I don't know. I know we had a great exodus to Kansas, but there's never any historic record that I could find that there was a great exodus and migration to exduster to Wyoming. So I was like, how in the world did this church get to Wyoming? So I started doing my research. The university has something called the American Heritage Center that is a repository of some of the interesting history here in Wyoming. And so it does have a collection on faith in the West. And we have a department of religion, by which I can also add that first day when the provost told me that he was going to get rid of my position, he also told me that he was going to get rid of philosophy and religion. And I thought to myself, I might have to be like Esther. If I perish, let me perish. But there's no way that I'm going to sit here and let him get rid of philosophy and religion. I might have a PhD in biochemistry, but I know that a land grant institution, the state's only 4-year institution, has to be able to offer something to everyone. And besides, we have a law school. And I didn't want the asterisk in the history book beside my name saying Wyoming's first Black female dean for the College of Arts and Science allowed philosophy and religion to also be taken out of the curriculum. So I stood up against that, and I'm happy to say so far, I was able to convince them not to remove philosophy and religion. And so as of now, there's still a department. But I started going through history and trying to figure out how the AME Church came here. And I found out there was this woman named Lucinda and Lucy Phillips. Now, the records give Reverend Whitlock in 1878 as the founding pastor. But all the records about the selling of the land and the building and construction of the church was the efforts of Lucinda Phillips and her family. And so I try to figure out who Lucinda Phillips was. And I found out, interestingly, she was a slave woman who came here. She took one of the first trains, Union Pacific Railroad trains, out to Wyoming in November of 1867, like 2 years after slavery ended, to join her husband and with her husband and daughter to come out to the West. And she started, she found the money to help buy the land for the AME Church. As was interestingly, when they came to Wyoming, they went to the United Methodist Church. And almost a similar thing that happened to Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. They were eventually made not to feel so welcome. And so she realized that African-American people, Black people in particular, needed to have a place that they could feel comfortable in praising and worshiping the Lord. Now, I have no idea how she found out about AME, but she did. And she started the AME Church here in Cheyenne that's been going now for 145 years. Our church is older than the state of Wyoming, because when she moved, we were the Dakota Territory. And then now we're then it became the Wyoming Territory. Now it's the state of Wyoming. And our church is continuously older than the state. So we just celebrated our 145th year.
Because Wyoming was admitted the state in 1890, when all the Dakotas and everything in the West came in 1889 to 1890. But just reflecting, now I know viewers here, and we've probably heard, the story of Biddy Mason out in California, and how first AME Church was started in Los Angeles. And Biddy Mason walked with that wagon train all the way over to Los Angeles and had the money and was able to build an AME Church and provide the land for that church. Just to think that another Black woman, Lucinda Phillips, was able to do the same thing in Wyoming. And her name has not been as well known as Biddy Mason, but I'm glad that we're able today to celebrate Mrs. Lucinda Phillips. And just to understand that and I think you mentioned that, she worked as a laundress and she worked so this woman took her money from a laundromat and said, we have to have a church here, and understanding what it meant to have this space for Black people, and that women of ours ways for taking care of our community. And to know that to take care of the community, this space was needed for us. And, reflecting on the fact that the Union Pacific Railroad, for example, we used to have a church in South Dakota, and we still have churches in Montana. And those churches got there with the railroad folks,
Yes.
As soon as if there was a railroad, somebody was building it, Black folk, and Black people were there, we had a church. And, some of those churches, like the South Dakota work, is no longer there. We've lost some of the churches in Montana, but we still have 2. And to know that this work in Wyoming is still there in the least populated state, and the state that I think has the second smallest percentage of African Americans in the country. I think Vermont is the first, or Maine, I can't forget which one. It's amazing that we're still there and thriving, and you were able to find us. So
and God is faithful. I just say that I'm trying not to cry, but every time I think about the goodness of the Lord, it just makes me happy. So these aren't tears that I'm crying because I'm upset, but these are tears of joy just to think about how good God has been. I find it very interesting that she was a laundress. So in other words, she was using her Black hands to wash their clothes.
Yes.
But yet they would not let her worship with them. And how she knew some 140 years ago that a little Black girl from Supply, North Carolina would be moving to Wyoming and need this church. And so I just thank God, in the play, Faith of Our Mothers, I open with a prologue telling the story of how I got to New Orleans and giving you an idea, historical fiction about how I imagine that she brought the church here and how she learned about the church. And then I close with the epilogue where I'm talking with her character, and I tell her that she knew she did this just for me, to make sure that God knew that I needed this church. On the first day of walking in, you have to understand, my mother had just had an aneurysm, had a stroke. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to make a move to do what would be best in the long run for my family. Mm-hmm. And how I felt like the rug was pulled up out from under me. But I can say God provided angels in that room that day when the provost told me every other dean that was there, I could collectively feel their arms reach out to catch me. Because it was, I'm gonna tell you in my mind, I had a DMX moment. Y'all gonna make me my mind up in here.
Yeah, wow.
But Michelle and the better angel talked to me and said, "Don't do it. Don't turn over the table." So, God is with you. And when God is with you, there's nothing that the devil can do. If you just stand on his promises, and he's been faithful to generations. And I say that, passion, purpose, persist. I know what my passions are, and I know God has led me to my purpose. And with his help, I will persist. And there's not a devil in hell that can change that. Because with God on my side, if he's for me, it doesn't matter who's against me. So I'm sorry that I'm crying on camera, but
that's all right.
I think about the goodness of the Lord and how God has kept and carried me through this very tumultuous situation. And he's the same God yesterday and today and tomorrow. And I know that. And I thank God for the generational wealth that my family poured into me to take me to church so that I would know God and to have him in my heart so that in times of trouble, that when things come up, I know where to lift my eyes to the hills. Not every kid has that. Not every person understands that. And so I'm just thankful. And Wyoming has been a very interesting experience. Yeah. I thought Chicago was windy. They need to think that this place is windy.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Dr. Okpodu, thank you for that. We know that God's promises are yes and amen.
Amen.
And we thank you for sharing your witness, sharing your testimony. We're going to go to another commercial break. And when we come back, we'll want to talk a little bit more about the work at Allen and what's going on at the church right now.
Okay.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test.
I'm Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, Senior Pastor of Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, the cradle of African Methodism, and I'm looking for your vote to be the next historiographer of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. At Mother Bethel, we recently received a $90,000 grant to preserve our windows, those beautiful stained glass windows. If elected historiographer, I'll bring those same skills to the office and help other churches learn how to leverage their historical story to get preservation dollars. We also have been been busy about the promotion of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, you know my work. I've produced multiple documentaries on the history of our church, and it's time now for a motion picture of the global AME story. This is the Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, seeking your vote as the next historiographer of the AME Church. Let's not miss our opportunity.
And we're back, and we are thankful for our sponsors who enable us to continue to bring you this quality AME programming. So, Dr. Okpodu, you are a member of Allen Chapel, Cheyenne. Now, first of all, as we talk about what's going on at Allen, Cheyenne, and what the life is at the church, how far is it from where you are in Laramie to Allen, Cheyenne?
So it's about a 45-minute commute. So Laramie, we're about 7,000 feet. So that's one of the things I think is really funny. So whenever basketball teams or football teams come in here, it says, welcome to 7,220 feet. Mm. And so in order to get to Cheyenne, which is at actually a little lower elevation, I have to go through something called the summit. Mm-hmm. And the summit is very famous for, it has a monument about at 8,000 feet of Lincoln, and that passage is called the Lincoln Pass Highway. And so it takes me about 45 minutes on a good day, as long as it's not snowing in the summit. So it's not a bad commute from here, from Laramie to Cheyenne. And it's pretty straightforward off of I-80. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about the church. I mean, what's going on in the church? I mean, the members, the activities. What's it like being AME in Wyoming?
So we're a little church that could. They have a very active church. We have somewhere between 20 and 25 people who show up every Sunday. I am not able to always go physically, but I try to join over the internet if I can. Thank God for that ability. That was an unintended blessing that came out of COVID. Now we can connect, as you and I are doing right now, have these kind of conversations. So Allen has an active missionary group. And so those women get together and they have various activities we do. We try to have some things for YPD. Even though we don't have a lot of children, we still do things in the community for children. I know for Black History Month, we had a contest that our current pastor, Reverend McClendon, was talking about doing for the kids, a contest, kind of oratory types of things that, you and I probably grew up with, those kind of things that helped us to be more grounded in what we understand and be a part of the community. There's something that's going on that I think is very interesting, that and as an outreach of reconciliation, the United Methodist Church, the minister there, and I apologize, I don't remember his first name, but I know he's reached out to our membership to do more joint things together to try to abridge the egregious way in which our foundress was treated while she even started our church. And so reconciliation activities are going on here in the West. People, for the Martin Luther King celebration we had joint churches to come together from different denominations. We have a large Baptist contingency here. And so they joined with us, and we had joint ceremonies and opportunities. I got to speak at the Martin Luther King celebration, and my talk was, what about the children, the hope of the future, to continue the dream. And so we talked about things that we can do to encourage our children to get into these new areas of technology that is now emerging. We don't want to be left on the side of the road when it comes to AI and other technologies. And so we're doing a lot of things. We're a small group. We do have Warren Air Force Base, and we have a lot of young people of color who are associated with the Air Force Base. And so we try to do things with them as a community. Their commander is an African-American woman, and I apologize, I don't recall her first name, but I met her at the Martin Luther King holiday celebration, And so I know that they're doing a lot of things in Cheyenne around the service people who are there, who have children who are in the school system. We still have things that we need to work on. We're not like any other, I mean, we're just like every other place where people fear what they don't understand.
Mhm.
And so we have to do better to making sure that they understand that we all want the same thing and that we're all part of the collective. I had somebody tell me out here that somebody didn't like me or something like that. And I said, well, Jesus didn't tell me. First of all, I have friends, but Jesus told me that they didn't have to like me. He told me to love them. And he didn't say they had to be lovable either. He told me that I'm supposed to love them. So for me, it's a 1 Peter 4:8 kind of thing. I love you with a radical hospitality with the Ubuntu. And so, and there's not a thing you can do about it. So, and the more that we realize that we don't need the other people, but we need to include people, I think we'll also have more people coming back to our connection when they feel they can be part of the connection.
You just said something right there. In order you have to feel like you're a part. And I know that we are having discussions about, as one of the discussions that will be at the General Conference will be about, trying to talk about making people who feel othered welcome in our denomination. And I know that's something that will be interesting to see how those discussions go. But Dr. Okpodu, I again just want to affirm the work that is going on at Allen and the fact that y'all are the little church that could. I tell people, we have churches in Wyoming. We have churches in Alaska. They're like, Alaska? I'm like, yes, we have churches in Alaska. Wyoming. We have churches everywhere in the country. And also, before we end, I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out and a appreciation and gratitude to your presiding elder, Sherilyn Hodge Curry, who made this connect and made sure that we did this interview, because I was talking to her about church and she's like, you have to call this woman. You have to have her on the dialogues because we have to tell the story of this church. Yes. So as we close, I just want to ask you, Dr. Okpodu, what do you want the AME Church to know from this faithful community, Allen AME in Cheyenne, Wyoming? What would you want the AME Church to know about what you all are doing?
So I'm actually going to ask of another ask for the community to consider. So we at the University of Wyoming have a foundational account that I established called Friends of Lucinda Phillips. And what I'm trying to do is to raise money so that we can have here a fellow that could perhaps come from one of the AME churches or our different universities who might be interesting to do scholarship and hold the Lucinda Phillips chair. We don't have any chairs, we don't even have a chair for Elizabeth Byrd, which I find kind of interesting, who is an African-American woman. She was also an member of the AME Church. I looked today, she was a member of Allen and Cheyenne, and according to the university's American Heritage Society collection. But we need support for that. And all you have to do is to call the foundation, the UW Foundation, and just make a small contribution to the Lucinda Phillips, Friends of Lucinda Phillips. And I'm trying to do that. That is when we're using some of the proceeds to support a residency for a director to come and direct the play that will be on the stage February 14th, 2025. So Friends of Faith of Our Mothers will be on the stage February 14th, 2025. And we have, which the church has supported me tremendously. We have Friends of Lucinda Phillips here at the University of Wyoming. And I'm hoping someone who's listening to me will feel compelled to give to that so that we can have something. We'll be the first, I know you probably heard of the Black 14, but that was about the 14 Black young men who were treated unfairly by the institution, and they are trying to do a justice, equity a movement for a DEI movement. Well, as a JEDI, which I stand for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, I would like to see something in honor of a Black woman, and I think it's nothing more than appropriate for it to be Lucinda Phillips and to honor her contribution to the state of Wyoming and her vision of knowing that generations to come after her. And she left, we talk about generational wealth. Mm-hmm. This is what we need to be giving to our children to understand that there is wealth in our faith community. and how that this can sustain us through generations and through horrible times. So I'm hoping that you'll know that we are still an active community and we can use your support.
Wow. Well, we'll definitely share the information. And you mentioned Elizabeth Byrd. Who is Elizabeth Byrd?
She was a state representative, from my understanding. She was the first Black woman to be in the Senate in Wyoming.
And she was
she graduated from University of Wyoming. And I don't think they have anything. I know her family is very active. I met her son at the Martin Luther King celebration. But as I was looking through, I don't see anything set up foundationally for her. And I might be wrong. And somebody will correct me, I'm sure. But as I was looking today, I think Lucinda Phillips is the first fellow that has been established. There may be a scholarship for Ms. Byrd, but I don't think there is a faculty fellow chair that I'm trying to set up.
Well, knowing your tenacity and knowing your faith, I have no doubt that the Lucinda Phillips chair will be established in short order. And we're looking forward to that progress. And at some point, y'all will probably get me out to Wyoming, not when it's
You'll probably be our first chair.
Well, that would be an honor. Well, that would be an honor. But we are indeed, happy for not only you taking time to share with us, but the stories you've told. And again, as we celebrating Women's History Month and distinguished women, I'm glad that we could lift up two names today. Your name, Dr. Okpodu, as well as Lucinda Phillips. And I'm sure Lucinda Phillips will be smiling to know that her presiding elder is a woman as well. So yes,
Amen.
You too, Reverend Sherilyn Hodge Curry. We are thank you for, again, looking this up. So, Dr. Okpodu, we appreciate you again. We will share this information. And for those of y'all watching, thanks for watching. And we look forward to sharing with you again on another TCR Dialogue.
Thank you so much.